Hey there, I'm digital anchor Brandy Smith. There is a lot of interest in the oral arguments made before the Supreme Court today about Senate Bill 8, the Texas Heartbeat Act, which the court allowed to go into effect 2 months ago today. I spoke to our KHU 11 political and legal analysts to get their take on those arguments, what they mean for the law as it stands, and the effect the ruling could have in Texas and the United States as a whole. Listening to these oral arguments this morning, on the legal side of things, what did you pick up on?
You know, this was an interesting case because it was so one-sided. I mean, I think these justices made very clear what their thoughts were regarding this law coming out of Texas, and they were not happy with it.
It's the questions that I think come from Justice Comey and Justice Kavanaugh, and both have already made it very clear that they find the enforcement mechanism, this unusual opportunity, not for the state, the Attorney General, to enforce the law, but individual citizens who can bring suit against abortion providers. It essentially takes the federal judiciary out of the process of reviewing state laws and creates what we call a sort of vigilante enforcement. And both justices were greatly interested in that. I think Comey and Kavanaugh expressed some concern that this was unprecedented, and that in one instance, I believe it was Justice Kavanaugh, I can't be certain, actually asked, could this be used to suppress other constitutional rights, such as Second Amendment rights to bear arms? Could individuals in states that have passed these laws sue individual gun owners in gun sales stores? And I think what you got from those two justices, you've already gotten it from, of course, Justice Roberts, who thinks this is, I think he called it irregular and unprecedented law enforcement. So I think what you're beginning to see is an effort on the part of some members of the court to join the liberal group, not to overturn or to support Roe v. Wade, but simply say this bill, SB 8, has an enforcement mechanism or implementation mechanism that they find unconstitutional or at least inappropriate. That's number one. Number two, I didn't see any effort and questions from the other justices about overturning Roe v. Wade. That tells me that they're waiting probably for the Mississippi case to come up later in the court's session, probably in June, and that's when you'll get, my money would be on probably overturning Roe v. Wade some way, not overtly, but around some of the restrictions on abortion.
I think a lot of people have the question, wait a minute, didn't the Supreme Court already make a decision about Senate Bill 8? And they let it go into effect, but now they're looking at that enforcement mechanism.
Yeah, I think what happened was everyone was the court said the law can stay in place. So that gave supporters of SB 8, anti-abortion advocates, some reason to be satisfied. What they did say was they were going to pull it up from the appeals courts and immediately give a hearing, and particularly on this issue of dealing with, of course, how to implement the law. I think the court at this point, if I had a bet on it, would probably overturn the law, but not on the issue of Roe v. Wade and the right of a woman to have access to an abortion within the first trimester. They're just simply going to say the enforcement mechanism. Now, they could throw it back to the Fifth Circuit and say, tell the legislature to fix it. The interesting question is, will they let the law stand? I don't see how they can if they find the enforcement mechanism. Now, the politics of this become even more interesting. As we know, the governor of Texas is the only one that can call the legislature back into session. Lieutenant Governor Patrick has already said he would like the governor to call back the legislature for an entirely different matter, audits of elections, something that President Trump has advocated for. Attorney General Paxton, who himself is up for re-election, like all of the governor and lieutenant governor, is also being challenged by as many as I think 4 opponents. And he may also call for a special session to fix this deficiency in SB 8. And what that might be might look like the Mississippi case. But the interesting question is, does the governor do this? He's resisted calling the legislature back on the issue of audits of elections, but he himself is being challenged by very conservative opponents who probably would want some anti-abortion law to be considered by the legislature. So I think what you're going to see is the political fallout of this coming back to the governor. That's assuming that my reading of the tea leaves and these questions, and I want to be very cautious here. People asking questions from the Supreme Court doesn't mean a decision. But I have to say, if I had to weigh this way, it looks like they're leaning to say the enforcement mechanism is flawed, go fix it. But they can't keep the law in place. So that will probably allow abortion providers to go back and provide abortions, which I should note have been cut severely in Texas since this law was passed, to the point where there might not be but a handful of abortion clinics operating.
Politically, Senate Bill 8 going into effect had the effect that its supporters really intended, and that was that steep decline in abortions throughout the state.
Yeah, no, I think the goal here, I'm not trying to be cynical. I think strategically the goal of the Texas legislature, at least some of them, the Republican majority, was to stop abortions. They knew they could not do that without somebody overturning Roe v. Wade. They knew they already had the Mississippi case coming up. They wanted to do one better. They wanted to stop them now, immediately, even if they knew they had a flawed implementation device that might get overturned. The politics of this were really good. And let me note here, there's some belief now that pro-life, anti-abortion, pro-choice, the right of a woman to have access to abortion, that there is a real dissimilarity in intensity of preference, that it is the pro-life people who care more intensely about this issue than are the pro-choice people. The test will, of course, be if Roe v. Wade is overturned. But right now, I think what you're seeing is a lot more pressure, particularly in Texas, from those who are pro-life, anti-abortion. The question becomes, what happens after SB 8 is probably overturned by the courts or ruled invalid? What happens in the Mississippi case? And the betting there is that the court, Comey, Kavanaugh, even Roberts, might not uphold Roe v. Wade. They may actually allow the Mississippi law to be upheld and simply nibble at abortion rights rather than reversing. Courts don't like, particularly Supreme Courts, they don't like to make abrupt changes. They don't like to, although this is a 40-year-old decision, they don't like to change and look overtly political. And this Comey, Justice Comey, spoke at the University of Louisville some weeks ago, in which she said, we are not crass partisans. We make judicial decisions on their merit, not on their politics. So you can get a sense that she's aware of this. And remember, there are 3 new members of the court. And these new members, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and now Comey, are well under the age of 50, maybe not quite 50. They're going to be on the court for another 20, 25, maybe 30 years. And they don't want to be in a court that has been besmirched and whose reputation has in the past been very, very high compared to the president, Congress, House, and Senate. Now they look like they're looking like a partisan group. And when you have a life-term appointment, you worry about those kinds of things, even if you don't necessarily admit it. And Justice Comey clearly was admitting it.
So where do we go from here? I mean, we expect a ruling in, what, a couple of weeks?
Well, it kind of depends, but sure, it's going to happen a lot sooner than most opinions might. But keep in mind, this case is not about the constitutional challenge to this statute, right? Today, what we saw were lawyers arguing over the right to challenge the constitutionality of this statute, because on its face, it says you cannot challenge it constitutionally. And so what we heard the justices say today is that just can't be the law, that there is no challenge to a state regulation or policy like this. So what we'll see is that it will be remanded back to the district court. And I expect they're going to say that, in fact, individuals across Texas are going to have the ability to challenge the constitutionality of this law. And we're going to see it back in the United States Supreme Court for that challenge.
Was there anything else that really stood out to you that you think people should take note of?
Well, like I said, I don't think this was a close case. It was surprising to see how heavy-handed or clear these justices were about the issues in this case and how concerned they were about the constitutional challenges that were being faced in this situation. But to me, the most important thing is that there's a lot of people who are concerned about Roe v. Wade and that, there's going to be some significant changes in the law. I think these justices made clear today that they place a high value on the constitutional rights of citizens and specifically those under Roe v. Wade. So I expect that if we get back to this challenge, that we're going to have some strong voices in favor of a woman's right to choose.
I'll tell you the other little, it's a sidebar. It's a sidebar. It's a Justice Roberts is very much in an awkward position. When you're the Chief Justice, as he has been for a while, he often also plays the role of, if not peacemaker, consensus builder. The court has clearly shifted to the right with President Trump's appointments. And I think he's looking to try and hold that center position for himself and for the court. And I think this may be his greatest effort over the SB8 bill. He's still got a big challenge with Roe v. Wade, and he's not sympathetic to it. I don't think he felt that the decision 40 years ago was a good one. Sometimes justices think not so much in terms of the politics and the cultural, they think about the institution. Will people continue to support the court? And I think Justice Roberts right now is teetering on, of course, the law, which takes precedent over all things in his mind, but also where do we stand as an institution in the American public's mind? And knowing how much the presidency and the Congress have declined, he wants to be able to, how can I put it, be that, shining light on the hill. And that's hard. That's really hard for him.
Our coverage continues tonight with reporter Marcelino Benito reporting from Washington, D.C. at 4, 5, 6, and 10.